Now, about a year after The Force Awakens came out, while the world, or at least the Star Wars fandom, was endlessly debating who Rey's parents would turn out to be, I came across an article where, in regards to that big mystery, Daisy Ridley had said that, "I thought a lot was answered in The Force Awakens. Then, after the screening, I went for a drink with my agent and everyone, and we were chatting away and I realized that, oh, in their minds, it's not answered at all." At the time, then, I interpreted this to mean that she thought the answer as to who Rey's parents were was rather obvious or hidden in plain sight, and if we stopped overthinking it, we'd see the answer sitting right there clear as day in the film. And who knows, maybe it was never really meant to be a mystery at all. Maybe we were always supposed to just get it, and we fans created arguably the biggest mystery in the history of Star Wars, where none was ever supposed to exist. Anyway, to me at least, if the answer was supposed to be that obvious, I saw there being only two real possibilities. Two suspects, if you will, that there was any real solid, plain as day evidence for right in the film. The first one was Luke Skywalker being the father, because, I mean, you've got the Skywalker family saber, for a lack of a better name, calling out to Rey and showing her what appears to be almost a brief history of their family. Then you have the fact that the plot of the movie is all about finding Luke, and that it ends with Rey handing the aforementioned Skywalker family lightsaber to him on the island of the first Jedi Temple, and after that, or in the next movie, I think we all assumed Luke would train her and give her some answers about her identity, because he would know or suspect who she was. The second option that I thought was a real possibility for Rey's origin, and I made a video about it back in the day that quite literally changed my life and essentially launched my YouTube career, is that Maz Kanata's words in the film about the belonging she seeks being ahead of her and not behind was really the movie's way of very bluntly trying to tell us that it wasn't going to matter who she was or where she came from. All that mattered was where she was going and what she would make of herself. And I even suggested in that initial video back then, and I got a lot of flack for it, that perhaps her parents may even end up being deadbeats that simply didn't care and left her behind. And sure enough, when The Last Jedi came out, it was revealed that Rey was nobody, and that her parents had even sold her off for drinking money. I'd apparently spotted the obvious clue Daisy Ridley had been talking about. But then, as time went by, we started to learn more and more about the behind-the-scenes stuff, more about the decisions that had gone into the making of the film, and it became more and more clear, as if the movie itself doesn't make it clear, that there was no overall plan, and Rian Johnson had simply made the movie exactly the way he'd wanted to make it. At one point, and I believe it's in some of the bonus material in The Last Jedi Blu-ray, I heard Rian Johnson say that the reason why he decided to make Rey's parents nobodies is because he thought it'd be the hardest thing for her to hear in that moment. He thought it would have been easier for her to hear that she was a Skywalker or whatever else and had a part to play in the story. But hearing she wasn't that she was essentially nobody, meant she'd have to find her own place. And though that was basically what I thought or theorized they were going to do with the character of Rey, I suddenly felt a lot less proud of myself, because now it seemed I hadn't correctly spotted the ultimate clue in The Force Awakens. Not to mention, it turns out all that analyzing of the movie I'd done, a year's worth of making theory videos, was all for naught or was just pointless. Because it had simply come down to what Rian Johnson wanted to do with the story while working on or writing his part of it. Not something that was, again, part of a larger agreed upon story. Not something that had been set in stone somewhere from the start, like in some overall outline that had been created for the whole trilogy. Not an actual mystery, clues and all, that we could have figured out by just watching that first movie. Basically, I'd only guessed what Rian Johnson was going to come up with when working on the script. But of course, that origin he decided upon for Rey wasn't going to last very long. The Rise of Skywalker would change it yet again, or I'm sorry, it was going to expand upon it and let us know there was more to the story yet. Because though Rey's parents were quote-unquote nobody, her grandfather was of course Emperor Palpatine, though I'd argue that Rey's father, who is the son of the Emperor of the Galaxy, would still very much be someone, even if he'd ran away and hid from it all his life. Anyway, let's not worry right now about all the details behind how Palpatine even had a son, why he didn't use his son as a new host like he wanted to do with Rey, why Ochi the assassin killed Rey's parents instead of capturing them, exactly how Rey got left on Jakku of all places and how she was never found there, or why Snoke wanted to kill Rey in Episode 8 if he was in a sense Palpatine and Palpatine wanted to use Rey in his plan in 9. Let's not worry about any of that because the 10 seconds The Rise of Skywalker spent explaining it all was good enough, I think. And yes, that's sarcasm. Seriously though, trying to make sense of all that might make for a good, fun video another time. But what I want to do now is go back again to those comments made by Daisy Ridley shortly after The Force Awakens came out, where she said that she thought much was answered in the movie, or basically said it should have been kind of obvious who her parents were. And I think we can all agree that in no way, shape, or form was it made obvious or even hinted at that she'd be the granddaughter of Palpatine in The Force Awakens. Sure, some people made theory videos about the possibility even way back then that she could somehow be related to or created by Palpatine. But at the time, they were pretty much wild theories. About the best evidence they had to go on was that Rey seemed to be angry after she let the Force in during the final battle with Kylo Ren, after she'd essentially defeated him and was pacing like a predator above him. And though now well after the fact, we could look at that and construe it to maybe be that it wasn't the Force she was letting in, but rather Palpatine and or the dark side itself somehow giving her all that strength. Back then, I'd say it was a hell of a stretch to consider that a clue pointing to her being a Palpatine, because getting angry is not an exclusive trait to Palpatine. Damn near everyone gets mad at some point, even the calmest of people do. Not to mention, Skywalkers have been known to get pretty angry too, so assuming that was supposed to be a clue in the first place, it could have pointed a lot of different directions. It could have just as easily pointed at the Skywalkers. And that brings up another problem from back then. A lot of people assumed everything in the movie was meant to be a clue, not to mention some, myself included, thought clues could be found in the other sources of canon too, and wow, were we ever wrong about that. Anyway, some thought Rey using a mind trick pointed at her being a Kenobi, because we see Obi-Wan use one in the original trilogy and again in the prequels, and somehow that makes it an exclusive thing to Kenobis, even though we've seen plenty of other Jedi use it too. Then we heard Obi-Wan say to Rey in the Force vision that these are your first steps, which was also claimed to be evidence pointing to her being a Kenobi, even though that could just as easily be evidence that she's a Skywalker, since Obi-Wan once said to Luke back in A New Hope that you've taken your first steps into a larger world, and his words to Rey could have easily been a callback to that. In fact, they probably were. My point here is that if there's evidence in The Force Awakens pointing at anyone being the father, or at least who JJ may have initially had in mind, it's pointing squarely at Luke Skywalker. Even the line from Maz Kanata I used to make my case about her being no one could be construed to point to Luke, I suppose. That the belonging she seeks is ahead, not behind, meaning she has to go find it instead of waiting for it to come to her. And who again does she find at the end of the movie? Luke Skywalker. Next, if we factor in that Rian Johnson seemed hellbent to do the exact opposite with the story from what everyone expected, including J.J. Abrams, I think, it seems to imply that whatever notes or outline he may have gotten from J.J. Abrams likely said that he, meaning Abrams, intended to make Rey the daughter of Luke, and Rian Johnson, again, like with everything else, just went the opposite way and made her no one to subvert expectations. I mean, thanks to Mark Hamill, we know that Rian Johnson asked J.J. Abrams to change the ending of The Force Awakens, that originally when Rey showed up on the island, she was going to find Luke meditating with rocks floating around him. I'm guessing very similar to how we first see Rey in The Rise of Skywalker. Which means, as discussed at great length in other videos of mine, these two were clearly not on the same page with the story. And as pointed out earlier in this video, Rian Johnson even said what he did with Rey, making her nobody, was because he thought it was what was best for the story, not based on anything else or any sort of outline or any suggestions from Abrams. And so here at the end, looking back, when we add it all up, it seems clear to me that the obvious answer Daisy Ridley was referring to is that Luke was going to be her father, but Rian Johnson went another route with her character. Especially when we consider that if JJ did want her to be nobody, he likely would have kept her that way in The Rise of Skywalker. But again, with hindsight on our side, I think it's pretty clear he's wanted her to be more all along. That then might lead you to ask, if J.J. Abrams wanted her to be a Skywalker from the start, why'd he make her a Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker? Why not go back to the Skywalker idea? Well, it's almost certainly because Rian Johnson also killed off Snoke in The Last Jedi, which meant Abrams had to bring back a villain instead of using the one he'd created in The Force Awakens. Which then meant to truly make Palpatine feel like an even larger part of the story here at the last minute, or like he'd always been lurking in the shadows with a plan. You connect Rey to Palpatine. In a sense, doing that makes both of them more important to the story. But of course, J.J. Abrams didn't want to entirely abandon his idea that Rey was a Skywalker, so in the end he has Rey take on the name while Luke and Leia look on approvingly, which is an ending that I'm well aware not everyone likes. But if we subtract the middle part of the story, if we take out The Last Jedi, I think it's clear the idea for the sequel trilogy all along, or at least in JJ's mind, is that Rey was always meant to be the hero, and that she was always meant to be a Skywalker. That then means that Kylo Ren or Ben Solo was likely always meant to choose the light in the end to help his cousin defeat Snoke, or that he'd stay on the dark side and sadly would have to be killed by her. And no, it probably wouldn't have been quite that simple, or at least I really hope it wouldn't have been. Still, though Episode 8 clearly derailed JJ's original idea, I doubt what he'd initially had planned for this sequel trilogy was much more than a retelling of the original trilogy for, I suppose, this current generation. But what we ended up with felt more like a custody battle fought by J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson over what to do with these characters that, sadly, not a lot of fans really cared about in the first place. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Do you think Rey was always meant to be a Skywalker in the traditional way? Was she meant to be the daughter of Luke? Was that what JJ had obviously set up in that movie? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.